Hey everyone, welcome back to the Leadership Project with your host Mick Spears. Our vision is to inspire all leaders to challenge the status quo. We bring you weekly topics and thought-provoking guests to get you to stop, reflect, and think about what it means to be a leader in a modern world. Our aim is to help you become the leader you wish you always had, as we learn together and lead together. Please enjoy the show. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Leadership Project, where our vision is to inspire all leaders to challenge the status quo. We like to explore lots of different topics that leaders need to understand for them to be successful in their businesses and in their careers. And today, we're greatly honoured to be joined by Robert Jake Jacobs. Jake is the founder of Jake Jacobs Consulting. He's a keynote speaker and he's the author of multiple publications, including Real-Time Strategic Change, You Don't Have to Do It Alone, The Change Handbook, and his most recent book, Leverage Change, which covers 8 ways to achieve faster, easier, and better results from any change effort. He's also an opinion columnist with CEO World. It's a great pleasure to have you on the show, Jake. Please say hello to our audience and tell us a little bit more about your background.
Sure, Mick. It's a delight to be here. And I think that one of the best ways I can tell your audience a little bit about me is to tell you, how did I get into this work? And I was 21 years old. The sun was shining in through some blinds, and there was a woman sitting behind a desk. Her desk was piled up with folders and papers. And I was doing research. These were mental health facilities doing substance abuse treatment. And so I was there doing research for the university that I went to. And I would go in and spend an afternoon doing interviews in each of these locations. And then I would go back to my hotel room, which in those days was a pretty big deal to be going to hotel rooms while I was still in college and traveling across the country. And I would have a day to write up a case study. And I would go back to my room and dutifully write up my case study and get on a plane and go to the next facility. Well, this afternoon that I'm telling you about was different. It was in Buffalo, New York, and there was a woman sitting across the table from me who was the executive director of this facility. And I was taking notes, and I said to her, well, tell me a little bit about your clients that you see, these substance abuse treatment clients. And she said, I don't have to tell you anything. And there was sort of a resignation in her voice. And I said, I'm not sure I understand. What do you mean? And she said, look out through those blinds. And I looked out through the blinds in her office, and there were a group of young men standing on the corner and chatting. And it didn't look unusual to me. And I said, okay, I see some men on a corner. And she said, yeah, that's where they go to shoot up before they come in for their sessions. And I sat back and I stopped taking notes, and I looked at this woman, and I was on a path, Mick, to get a PhD in business and do more of this kind of research and case studies. And I actually remember sitting on her couch and deciding at that moment that I wasn't going to be doing research. And I wasn't going to be getting a PhD, and that what I was going to be doing was going to work with organizations so that people didn't have stories like this to tell anymore, that they were successful in what they were doing, that this woman's resignation in her voice, that few of those were going to be heard, because I could go into organizations and help them, not just the substance abuse treatment places, but all workplaces, to be able to make it when in the morning is a place where you can do your best and you can reach your full potential and you can be excited about working there. And so I always go back to this time in Buffalo, sitting in that woman's office and realizing that I could make a difference. And the best difference that I could make would be doing consulting work. And that was when I was 21 years old, and it's what I've done since then.
That's an amazing story, Jake. Tell us more about how that felt when you saw two things. When you saw the people on the street, but also that feeling of exasperation in the executive director's demeanor.
You know, Mick, I think I had two feelings, which they're really hard to have at the same time. I think because I don't know that I had them before or since, and they were the same feelings. Now you're asking me about both seeing that group of gentlemen and this woman, and one of them was sort of sheer dejection, feeling powerless in the face of, what she was trying to deal with and what I was trying to deal with, and how inconsequential this report was for the work that I was doing. It was just going to be writing up a very sad story, and I wasn't doing anything about it other than really documenting this woman's pain and the futility of the work that she was doing in her own eyes. And so I just felt this overwhelming sense of powerlessness. And I think at the same time, because I was headed to get a PhD in business, that was the path I was on. I had a great academic mentor. And at that moment, there was, sort of a lightning bolt that went through me of clarity. And I said, no, that's not what I'm going to do. And I'm not going to sit here and spend a career doing interviews with people who are despondent because their organizations aren't effective. And so I had an internship with a consulting firm. And so I had a really easy path into doing this work that was waiting for me. And I just sat there and I thought, well, this could be different. I could help make this different. And whether for that woman or for the next one or for the woman that was at a plant that I worked at that stood up in a large group session, they were going to be laying people off from this plant. And a woman stood up in the crowd and she said, I just want you all to know that I'm willing to give my job up right now so that my son has a place to work in the future. Now, you hear stories like that and you say, we can make a difference, that there are so many good people and organizations waiting to be able to make their best contribution. So I've always followed a path of helping people reach their full potential. And that's really what gets me up in the morning. I mean, the book called Leverage Change, 8 Ways to Achieve Faster, Easier, Better Results. And at the end of the day, what the book is really about is helping people achieve their full potential. And the best way for them to achieve their full potential is to have effective change. And my argument is the best way to have that effective change is what I've captured in the book. And, those lessons go all the way back to, this nameless woman in the office in Buffalo at the end of the day with that light streaming through. It all takes me right back there as if we were sitting there today.
I can see that in everything that you're saying, that you're reliving it all the time. And what I'm hearing is that you are strongly driven to create a positive impact on the world, and your chosen vehicle to do so is to help people find their path towards creating their own positive impact.
Absolutely. And, I won't even say any more, Mick, because that captures it perfectly.
You have expertise in organisational change, and let's go back to the lady in our story, the executive director, and that feeling of being despondent and frustrated, exasperated, whatever adjective we'd like to show. That doesn't sound like an isolated case to me. I come across this in my career all the time. you end up with these collective groups of people that all go into their roles, their businesses, with the right meaning, with the right purpose, with the drive to want to make a positive change, but often end up in a system or a process where they get frustrated that they can't affect that positive impact that they're looking to do. Tell us more about that.
Well, I think, Mick, I think there are way too many of those stories. And I think, if I'm honest, I think those stories get told in all organizations, including the ones in which I consult. And I can do my very best in whatever parts of the organization that I'm working that people have an excitement. One of the levers, each of these levers in the book deals with a particular problem that people experience when they're trying to create change. And then there's a lever to address it. So one of the things that you hear in every organization I've ever worked in, when it comes time to change, people say, "What's in it for me?" Right? In my organizations that I've worked in, they actually love acronyms. And so they call it WIFM. What's in it for me? And a lot of leaders and thought leaders in the world of change look at that as a selfish interest. They're like, those people are only care about themselves. And if they only cared about the organization or their teammates or their business unit, this would all be different. And so what they do is they go on a journey of trying to convince these people the benefits of the change for them. This is called a case for change. We have names for these things. And in this situation, I believe, as is true with most of these levers, that there are issues with the paradigm that people have and their practice based on that paradigm. So what do I mean? Well, in this case, if it's a healthy, reasonable thing to ask what's in it for me, if that actually is okay, and then we need to have a good answer for it. Instead of trying to answer that individually, the lever that I came up with is called develop a future people want to call their own. And see, what's different about this is it's a collective response. We're not trying to convince one person. What we're doing is we're inviting people into a process to create a future that they want to call their own. So one is that we're doing this together and we're not doing it alone. Another one is that we are creating something that people want to be part of. And when you want to be part of something, you don't worry about what's in it for you anymore. You know what's in it for you. It's an exciting, compelling future where your organization is successful, your customers are satisfied, your suppliers are thrilled. I mean, you love to go to work in the morning. All of these things are part of a future that you want to call your own. So these levers, I call them uncommon wisdom, because the common wisdom is try and convince those people. The uncommon wisdom is you don't need to convince those people if there's an exciting future waiting for them. I've never had to try and talk somebody into something terrific. They know it. And if they have a hand in crafting it, they can be confident that it will be terrific and exciting and stimulating. And that whole notion of achieving your full potential, everybody in the organization has an opportunity to do that when they're creating a future they want to call their own.
There's so many nuggets of gold there, Jake, that I'd like to pick on. So you started off very early in our conversation talking about bringing the best out in people. Then you brought us to WIFM, what's in it for me, but now you're bringing us to ownership and engagement and buy-in, that if people see a new transformed version of themselves in the future, one that they're happy, one where they're proud of what they're achieving, then they will take ownership of the change themselves. So you're not implementing change to them, you're encouraging change in them.
Yeah, and I think, Mick, the other thing is that we got to find ways to support people in doing this work. And if you think that it's up to you as a leader to try and make change happen, one of the things I do is these short videos on LinkedIn. So people can look for Robert Jake Jacobs and find these videos. And one of the videos that I did recently is about my parents. Right now, I have a 91-year-old dad and 86-year-old mom, and we've taken the keys away from them. Right? This happens. It's a level of freedom that disappears with all of us with age. And so I'm their driver. And what that means is I take them where they need to go, wherever they need to go, whenever they need to go, that I can make it happen. And so I start this video out talking about being a driver of change in your organization. And how important that is, and how important you can feel to be the driver. It's somebody that stands up and makes a difference. It's somebody that pushes things through, that, you know, has this energy in the morning, that they get into work and they make things happen. And what I do in the video is I talk about a different kind of driving. I talk about the kind of driving I do with my parents. Because you see, when I drive my parents, it's their agenda. I'm never driving where I want to go. I'm always driving where they want to go. So when we think of drivers of change in organizations, the common wisdom is, you know, take names and whatever, kick whatever backside you have. It's that tough person who's going to force these things to happen, whether the system's ready for them or not. I'm a driver. Well, there's a different kind of driver, which is, how do you help people on their agenda get where they want to go? It's easy to drive things when it's my agenda and I care. But with my parents, I go where they tell me. And if I'm a leader that really listens to his or her people, the kind of driving of change I do can be quite different. And I think quite profound, and I think quite lasting, because what you're doing is you're building the capacity of the people in your organization to create change on their own. It becomes like servant leadership. I'm supporting my people and getting where they want to go. And if, in fact, I've done a good job educating them and creating an organization that really is a learning organization, that understands the marketplace, that understands the competition, they're going to go good places. I mean, I can let go of control. I've always told clients, if their people are smart enough, alignment happens on its own. I don't need to worry about somebody running off the agenda or off the page or working their own issues. If everybody, you know, reasonable people exposed to reasonably the same information come to reasonably the same conclusions. So getting people smart is another one of these levers. Create a common database, and it deals with the problem that people don't know enough to make good decisions on their own. And I think that's because we haven't educated them. I don't think that people are thick-headed. I think that there are people at the top of the organization that need to learn from people on the front lines just as much as people on the front lines need to learn from people at the top.
I'd like to bounce off that a little bit, Jake, and maybe build on it. I'd love your opinion on what I'm about to say if I build that story together. The bit I want to add is about vision and purpose and values and beliefs. So as the leaders of the organization, if you're really clear about your vision and your purpose and your values and beliefs, you will then naturally attract and retain people to you that share that common purpose and the common values and beliefs. Then in turn, then your job is, I'm not going to say done, it's your job is partially done. And now what I'm hearing from you, Jake, is then energizing those people and inspiring them to go on this journey because they want to go on this journey, and then empowering and enabling them and then letting them go, and that they will find their own alignment and their own cause because everyone's got that same vision, purpose, values, and beliefs in mind. Is that a fair summary?
Yeah, I want to put one twist into what you said.
Yeah, please.
The twist is that as leaders in an organization, what those values and beliefs are, is I need to take a stand and advocate for what I believe, to the bottom of my bones. I need to be clear about what I believe. And at the same time, and this is based on something called polarity thinking that a buddy of mine, Barry Johnson, taught me 30 years ago. At the same time that I take a firm stand on advocacy for what I believe, I need to have the same amount of inquiry into what my people think. And I can only do that to the extent to which I advocate for what I believe. So there are times when you listen to your people, but what you need to do, I think, is listen to them so carefully and so purposefully. In fact, as much as you want them to listen to you. And out of that conversation, out of that dialogue, I think is where the diamond is in the center of that oyster. I think that's the magic in organizations, is when you can get those kind of honest debates and the healthy debates that are there. They're there anyway. So the only question is, are we going to have them or not? And if I salute too quickly to what a leader is saying, then, shame on me and shame on the leader, because we all lose. So I've designed these interactive experiences where we have leaders bring their best thinking to the group. And I'm talking, 2, 3, 4, 500 people in table groups of 8. Now, the pandemic's gotten in the way of that, but we'll get on top of that. And there are ways to do it virtually. But they bring their best thinking. They educate that group, everything that they knew that led them to this conclusion. And then they say, at the end of a second day of a 3-day event, what do you think? And then we get each of these table groups coming up with their best recommendations for what to do to the mission, vision, values, the goals, whatever the work is they need to do. And then we have those posted around the room and people vote. So it's like I say to them, don't just go to your own sheet that you just came up with and vote. I know you're smart, you're wise, you're enlightened. That's cheating. So start with somebody else's sheet. But then as you go around, start marking the things that you really believe in. And then we have often the leaders and a cross-section of people from the group itself work on that turnaround. And they turn it around overnight. So this is not like we're going to get back to take it under advisement. Let's study this. We'll get a tiger team to get. No, this is that night. And I've worked with teams that have worked till midnight doing this with a level of integrity because they want to make sure they really do listen to what people are saying. And when they come back in the morning and they say, how does this look? The standing ovations that I've seen, because people really have been seen and their words have been used and their intention has been followed. All of those things make for a whole different kind of experience and a radically different relationship between leaders and people in their organizations. And people don't forget that. It's like, and it changes people. What we say with leaders that we work with is this kind of approach both creates and demands alignment. So I don't have to worry about what you're doing, Mick, after you come out of one of those sessions. I can give you the freedom to be creative and innovative and to reach your full potential in the work that you're doing. And I don't have to micromanage you because you understand what those goals are. You understand them at a very deep level because you've wrestled with what is a good answer to this. And you haven't just taken it from somebody else and had a cascade where it rolls out. I had a client once who said, when they roll things out in our company, they really roll us over. And they just flatten us with whatever that answer is supposed to be. And then we're supposed to salute. And meanwhile, we have to pick ourselves up off the ground and we've been flattened by this cascading process. It's not like that at all. It's much more of an ongoing conversation because once I get into that conversation with my leaders, I can never not have that kind of conversation again. It's like once I know that's possible and the expectation is there, game over. We're now playing a different game And it's one in which everybody's got to be on the playing field for it to work.
I love this process that you're describing, Jake, and I'm getting a really clear visual in my head, and I'm wondering whether the audience at home is getting the same thing. Got this big beaming smile on my face and picture of what you're describing, and it somehow is a crescendo of many of the things that we talk about on this show, which is why my smile is beaming and my heart is beating right now. People want to feel valued. They want to feel that their voice is heard. They want to feel that they matter, and you're giving them that voice. You're talking also about deep listening. So you're talking about having that conversation about vision, purpose, values, and beliefs. And yeah, stating some things up front, but then zipping it and listening and deeply listening with an open mind about new ideas, listening with an open heart to hear about the emotion of the way people feel about the business and the direction of the business, and listening with an open will, which means to imagine new possibilities, not just the ones that you've thought of yourself. And
Right.
then by having that engagement, it's almost impossible for people not to align to that because it's theirs.
Right. And Mick, one of the things that I know and I have seen in this process is that the listening is like you said, it's different. So that in the book, I actually talk about 4 magic words. And the magic words that I found in my career, both for me to ask as a consultant, because that listening counts for me too. If I come in with an answer and I try and force it on the organization, I'm no better than the leaders that I may be trying to help. Right? One of the levers is called design it yourself so that the organization has the opportunity to create their own change effort. So the 4 magic words are, could you say more? And the reason that those are magic, I believe, is because they act as an invitation to people to contribute. You're coming forward and you're saying, could you say more? And more is always different. So it could be in a one-on-one conversation with my manager, and the manager saying, could I say more? Well, it could be about a specific project, an idea, and something that I'm working on. If we say, could you say more? And you're in a large group meeting and your CEO is up front asking that question, what they're saying to somebody at a table group is, no, wait, before I answer this question, I don't want to make an assumption that I know what you're talking about. I want to understand what it is so that you're my customer right now. I want to satisfy your need and curiosity. So could you say more gets used in that act and in that situation too. And if all of us could learn a little bit more, I mean, I have a fiance, she wishes, I'm sure, that I would say, could you say more often? And that at the end of the day, better understanding each other is both the person speaking and being clear and the person who's listening, inviting even more than that first round, even more than that level of surface of here's my answer. And it's like, no, wait, I want to understand more deeply where that answer comes from. It's the kind of conversation that you and I are having right now. We could be satisfied with the first answer, but you're not, and I'm willing. But you're asking me in want of better words, could you say more? And those are the same ones that I write up in the book. And I say, good Lord, if more of us use that in our vocabulary on a daily basis, how much better our organizations would operate.
Well, thank you for picking up on that. That's exactly what I do on my podcast. Sometimes I even use those exact words, but certainly that's what I'm looking to expand always on the first concept, because there's always something more there. And for those that haven't tried it at home, this technique, tell me more, could you say more, the expansion of the mind that happens, the things that come after those conversations are usually the most enriching ones in terms of clarity, understanding, but a really key one, significance. If you go through these conversations and you're drawing it out, and if someone starts repeating the same maybe word or phrase a few times, you've found something there. You've found something that's really important to them. And come back to what's in it for me, you might have discovered something that if you just took the first answer, you might not have found. Yeah.
Absolutely. And some patience goes a long way. I mean, just one other of these levers, Mick, that I'll mention is around when change is too slow. And a lot of people have this issue, right? Because they need to make a change for new technologies, new customers, new markets. So speed is something that matters a lot. And rather than trying harder, right? I played basketball in high school, and I was what they call vertically challenged, Mick, which means you can't jump in simple terms. And the coach used to come during the rebounding drills, and he would yell at me, jump higher, jump higher. And I used to it was like a Far Side cartoon. It was like, what do you think yelling at me is going to all of a sudden enable me to get higher off this floor? But in terms of the book and moving faster, it's like, trying or yelling or trying even to encourage people to move faster. There's a simple paradigm shift that I've discovered around one of these levers that, has cut the time of change efforts in half or more. And it's called Think and Act as if the future were now. So what this says is that common wisdom is that the future is something out there, that it's going to arrive at a later point in time, and we wait for it to unfold. That's the definition of the future. But leverage change says, no, we're going to take a different approach to this. We're going to say, get a picture of the future, reach out, grab hold of that image, and bring it back into the present. And start thinking and acting as if that future you preferred were present right now. So as I start to say, well, we've got a participative organization, it's like you don't wait till next week or next month to try and get more participation. What you do is you look at your calendar in the afternoon and you see whose voices are going to be heard in the work that you're doing. And if you're supposed to be a participative culture, then you got to find some more voices to get in the room while you're doing your work. And not, like I said, next week or next month, but here and now. And the more that you start to behave as if that future were today, the sooner you start to experience the future, and the fuzzier the line between the present and future. And when I can't answer if I'm in the present or future anymore, that's actually good news, because that means that things are happening that wouldn't have happened for months or even years sometimes. But if you make that decision to live the future now, those changes happen very rapidly. And when you look around the organization, everybody starts behaving differently. So the person on the left and right of me is thinking and acting as if the future were now. It's very difficult to say nothing's changing when I look around at an organization where people are practicing that principle.
I love that, Jake. And you're picking up on one of my favorite things, which is visualization. So imagine 12 months from now, what have we achieved together? What do we look like? How are we different to how we are today? And then what can you start acting on immediately that as if that future is now? And I did read that chapter in your book, and that one resonated with me strongly, of which it all did, by the way. We've spoken a lot so far about how to make it work. So we've spoken a lot about engagement, ownership, getting people to design their own future and to be heavily involved in the change to make it work. But let's talk about some of the challenges for a while, because people, your own words, people find change hard. They find it slow. They find it disappointing. One of the ones I'd like to start with is change weariness. How can you give some advice to our audience about organizations, and I think there's many out there that are like this, where they've had so many change initiatives, one after the other, that some have yielded results, some have not. And then another initiative comes along and everyone's just, here we go again. How do you address that one?
Well, I think, Mick, the first thing we need to do is acknowledge the exhaustion. That we need to let people know that this is actually normal and to be expected. I mean, we as humans are not designed to deal with an inordinate amount of change, so much so that we can't turn left or right before we face yet another change. So as these changes are piling up in an organization, and they do, whether it's a reorg or a new process or a new tool or whatever it is that's being introduced with the best of intention, right? Nobody's doing this to harm somebody, but with the best of intentions, it ends up not only exhausting people, but it starts to chip away at their confidence. Am I able to do the job that I need to do surrounded by all this change? And, people talk about the day job and change work, and they talk about those like they're two separate things. Well, one common wisdom approach to dealing with too much change is do less change, right? I mean, if that's the problem, if we just pulled back the reins on the number of changes we were making, then it would be easier for people and they wouldn't be exhausted. They wouldn't lose confidence. And that's a great solution, except for one problem, which is if your organization needs to make those changes, then not making them is becoming an ineffective, unsuccessful organization. So giving up and saying, well, we'll just change less is not a good answer. So what's a better answer? Well, if you take a paradoxical approach to change, which is something that, sounds absurd at the surface, but when studied more deeply makes sense, what the lever that I've used to deal with this change fatigue is pay attention to continuity. So what I do is I talk with organizations, not just about what to change, but what not to change. And this is a very uncommon conversation in organizations. Nobody is talking about what to keep the same. You don't end up on the cover of Fast Company by saying, we're going to stay the same with an exclamation point next to it. It's not celebrated. People don't pay attention to it. And even leaders who stand up and know that most of what they're going to do in their organization is staying the same, they don't say that out loud. People don't hear it. And what they hear is this constant drumbeat of change. And that's where you get anxiety and you get worse performance. So in organizations in which I work, we always include what I think is the other side of the coin or the other part of reality, which is what's going to stay the same. And as you have those conversations about what's going to stay the same, some of these things we've done them very well and we want to continue doing. Now, there are some things in the past that we need to let go of that we have done well. Well, that's okay. Take an honest stock of things and make a strategic decision. But there are a lot of things that we've done well we're going to continue doing. And if we focus on those, people get more confident. They sit up a little straighter in their chairs. They speak with a little bit more energy. And I believe, and I've seen in organizations, they have the kind of energy to deal with more change because they're bolstered by that continuity. I say people to have firm ground to stand on when they have that continuity to take a leap into the unknown world of change. And if I have that firm footing, I've got a lot more confidence, a lot more belief that we're going to be successful in this. And that helps with anxiety. It helps people increase the believability index, I call it, of the work that they're doing around change. And the higher that believability index, the higher my confidence, the better my performance. All things ratchet up with a higher score when I pay attention to continuity.
I'm hearing so many wonderful things there, Jake, and I want to play some of them back to you in a summary form. And then I've got a question at the end that I'd like your help with. So the first one was acknowledge the pain. So if you're in a change-weary organisation, once again, people want to be heard. So do take the time to acknowledge that, yeah, we've had a lot of change efforts in the past. We acknowledge that it's a difficult thing to go through, etc. I think that's really important to do so. Then I heard you talking about trying to change too many things at once. And that's where some of the lack of success comes in as well. And that if organisations could reduce that number down to a more manageable approach, then it also maybe becomes a bit more tangible, that people feel like, oh, yeah, we could do that. And they start feeling some positivity towards a lower number of things to change. Then when you speak about paying attention to continuity, what I was hearing is making sure that you don't change the things that don't need to be changed. So if there are some things that do stick, then keep doing some of those things. They're part of who your company is and probably part of successes that you've had as a company up until that point. The bit I want to test is on that pay attention to continuity. What I was picking up in your book is if you said to say people, the same people that are change weary, if you said to them and go, okay, no problems, we're just going to not change anything. We're just going to keep the status quo. Those people would become very uncomfortable with that as well. Because I'm sure that in any company, there's always some things that people are not happy with. So if you put it back to them and said, okay, all right, business as usual, just continuity, those same people will then challenge you back and say, well, hang on a second. We said we're a change weary,
right.
but we
not
do.
so fast.
But not so fast. We do want to change. Am I right?
Yeah. And I think that, it comes from our desire to see the whole picture. And if you're only dealing with change, then you're missing a lot of pieces of that jigsaw puzzle. And same thing, if you're only dealing with continuity, then you're also missing pieces. There was a guy, and I wrote this up in the book, a guy named Joe. Honest, his name was Joe. And he stood outside our meeting room for the entire morning of this meeting around change. And we were dealing with a new mission and vision and values and culture. And I mean, it was a massive project. And he stood with 1 foot in the door and 1 foot out of the door the whole morning. I mean, if you want to talk about somebody on the fence, this literally, physically was a manifestation of somebody on the fence. And what we said was, everybody gets to make their own choice in here. So we asked Joe to sit down out of, basic manners. And he said, no, I'm fine. So we left him. And he didn't want to participate in the conversations. And that was okay, too. He gets to make his own choice, because otherwise somebody's jumping through a hoop because they told him they had to. My manager said I had to come and participate. And that's no way to get engagement. Well, Joe sat down at lunch next to me and he said, this is different. And I said, what's different? And he said, this meeting's different. And I said, oh, what's different about it? And he said, well, we're here talking about what needs to change. And before, we used to get told what was going to change. And he said, look, I'm not an idiot. I understand competition is coming. And he said, it's my job as well as the next guy's that's on the line. He said, so I'm not arguing that things don't have to be different here. I know they have to be different. He said, but how they get to be different is what I care about. And I have been told for 25 years in my career what I'm supposed to be doing here. And he said, this is the first time that I've sat in one of these meetings where somebody's asked questions instead of had answers, and looked to us to be able to answer those questions. And he said, that's a whole different deal. He said, count me in for the afternoon. I'm going to sit right here next to you. I've got my seat, and I'm not going to stand in the doorway anymore, because I'm not going to get bowled over by this, and I'm going to have my say. And those are the kind of experiences where, I step back and I smile and I say, I remember Joe. I remember exactly what he looks like, just like that woman in Buffalo. I know exactly what he looks like and exactly where he was standing in that doorway. And he made a different choice. But at the end of the day, Mick, you see, for me, the magic is he made a different choice. He made an informed choice based on real information that was shared with him. And then of his own volition, his own choice, he sat down at that table. He ended up being one of the zealots, one of the champions for this effort, and actually organized a group of champions throughout the whole company and made a video that went out to the whole company asking people to join him on this team. Well, this was not the kind of guy that you would have expected to do that when he had 1 foot in the room and 1 foot out that morning.
What an amazing metaphor. And that visual is strongly in my head now as well. This picture of someone 1 foot in the door, 1 foot out of the door. And it's almost like a business version of art imitating life, life imitating art.
Exactly.
That's just amazing. Tell us a little bit more about the concept that you said before about day job, because I think that one comes up as a lot as well. So people that have got their day job and then they're also on the change project, and it's seen as two different things. How do you break that one?
Right. So again, I'm going to come back to this paradigm, and how we choose to see the world is a lot of how we experience the world. So it is so typical for organizations and the people in them to have their day job and then this extra work, right? And the problem ends up being you have too much on your plate. And, I've heard this in every organization I've ever worked, that people have too much on their plate. And what they're saying is, I don't have the time or the energy to be able to take more on. And, in a lot of ways, that's reasonable. Now, what I developed was this lever that's called change work as part of daily work. Now, what do I mean by this? Well, you can't use this lever in every situation all the time. But when you can, it's solid gold. So here's a story of a client that I worked with where change work became part of daily work. I was working with the senior executive team, and of all things that they were frustrated by, one of them was their own meetings. And so we set up a little subgroup to work on their meeting structure. And that group came back. Now, I was a member of that group too, so some of this was my influence and suggestions, but they came back and they said, look, every meeting has to have a purpose and outcomes. And it's a results orientation that we're going to take to these meetings. Now, they were talking about a culture change around becoming a results-oriented company. So the purpose and outcomes, the senior leader said, yeah, and if nobody if nobody has a purpose and outcomes to their meeting 24 hours before the meeting, nobody has to go. You don't have to show up to a meeting with no purpose and outcomes. Why would we waste our time now that we know that we're results oriented? So the first two meetings after this rule got put in place, people didn't send purpose and outcomes. And what they found was nobody at their meetings. So it was a real wake-up call to say, let's start doing this. Well, in the executive team, they started to have purpose and outcomes for every meeting. And then the leaders would go back to their functions and they would have purpose and outcomes for all their meetings. And then their people would start having purpose and outcomes for all their meetings, and all their projects had a purpose and outcomes. A purpose answers, why are we doing this in the first place? And the outcomes are, how are we going to measure success? What are the deliverables that we want? Well, this caught fire in a positive way in the organization, so that when people were in the hallway, you'd walk by and somebody'd say, I'm going to be doing X, Y, Z. And somebody else would say, well, what's the purpose that you're trying to accomplish by doing X, Y, Z? Right? So in the organization, language-wise and behaviorally, they became a more results-oriented organization. And this is a great example of making change work part of daily work. It didn't take any more time. There was no special task force. There was no special meeting. This was part of their daily work, and they changed it. And it became something where a lever alone, just doing it without a formal change effort, brought about a cultural shift in the entire organization. And so when I talk about this notion of making change work part of daily work, you see these opportunities for people to start behaving differently. I had one client who did a whole team building effort over the course of 3 months with her team with no offsite. Well, they had weekly staff meetings, so they just set aside part of the meeting they were already going to have, and they did some team building as part of that work. And so they never had to go off site. They were building their team as they were doing daily work.
You're also talking a lot here about making choices and making choices that are around the purpose of the business, I think. So in this case, you're talking about pivoting to a results-oriented organization and then making sure that the actions match that. And I want to tie that to what you said about day job and people being busy. If we are making smarter choices about what we do, but more importantly, what we don't do, then you can build this in. You can build in the time needed to focus on change as part of your day job instead of it being separate. There's a lot of initiatives going around with people wanting to try to achieve work-life balance. As an example, I want to test this idea with you, Jake. And companies will put out policies that are trying to drive work-life balance without taking some of the pressure off. So the only way that you can really achieve work-life balance, if there's also some kind of pressure relief about things that people don't have to do, and being more selective about what you do and don't do so that you can then drive that. So you've got to be able to create space for people to be able to do this. Otherwise, it is day job and change job, right?
Right.
If they don't have enough hours in the day, there's no other way to do that. So I like what you were saying there about purpose and outcome of meetings, because what it was driving, the behavior I see it was driving, is being more selective about what people do and don't do.
Yeah. Yeah. And along with that, Mick, and this is the sort of stuff that you get for free, right? You don't have to pay any more for this, but you get focus, you get alignment, you get engagement. There's a guy, Stuart Kaufman, who did work in the new sciences, and he has a saying, and I put this into the book. He has a saying that says the universe gives you order for free. And what he was saying is that the universe on its own is an organized entity. And that when we interact with it, how we can see it, if we can see the implicit order that's there, even the weeds in my front lawn, right, are part of nature, and they're part of the natural ecosystem. So if you get order for free, it means that it's already there. We just need to recognize it. Well, the things that we're talking about with alignment, with energy, with focus, it's like if you have that results-oriented organization, all the rest of this stuff comes without even have to pay a penny for it. You just get that because, like you're saying, you start to decide what not to do. And people have more time freed up to be able to do what they need to be doing. And so now we've got everybody in an organization doing the work that they need to be doing. It's like it's an unstoppable force. I mean, the kind of organizations that get that level of clarity and that level of alignment They're the ones where their customers are thrilled, their retention rates for employees are through the roof. I mean, it's a very simple concept, but again, you've got to adopt that paradigm and you've got to be committed to it because it's going to feel uncomfortable in the beginning. It's not a normal act that most organizations have down pat. And so as you start getting into these new behaviors, you've got to also give yourself a little grace to be able to try things, not get it quite right. There's a forgiveness factor that comes along with trying new behaviors if everybody's trying them. If you're the one, Mick, trying to do things differently and screw up, that's your mistake. But if the two of us are trying to do something different and we screw up, now it became our mistake. And it's a lot easier to learn from our mistake than it is for you to learn from your mistake when I've got my finger pointed at you.
That's a wonderful analogy there, Jake, and bringing people together in that way. Let's talk about incentives. A lot of companies attempt to drive change through incentivization with a very hit and miss result. What's your experience with this?
I think, Mick, this is one of those yes and answers. That when there's an either or paradigm that people get into where it's like binary, like either you do it or you don't. And either it's right or it's wrong. And I think that there are many different forms of incentive that support people in making good choices. And so, I've seen people get acknowledged with President's Awards. I've seen people get acknowledged with cash bonuses. I've seen people get acknowledged literally in front of their peers with a thank you from the CEO. I've seen people acknowledged with opportunities to do new work without even being promoted, but they get an opportunity to do some other work that they wouldn't have been able to before. People have a self-satisfaction. I know I do. The self-satisfaction, when you're able to make a contribution that makes a difference, that's another kind of gratification, right? That's another kind of reward. And a lot of these don't cost money. I mean, there's all kinds of research that says that the intrinsic rewards or the ones that I give myself are much more valuable than the ones that are extrinsic or that come from the outside. But I think it's a yes and, because I think that the more ways that we can reward people for doing things well, that support the organization, that support their teammates, one of the things that I'm a deep believer in is that people themselves know what they experience as a reward. That even, oh my God, asking people, what could we do that would feel rewarding for you right now? I mean, we had one event. This was in a county in Kansas in the United States. And we were working late and we were doing one of these turnarounds. And so it was like basically dinner time, right? And we said it's 5 o'clock, not quite dinner time, but it was nearly dinner time. And we said to these people, what would feel like fun right now? And they were working their tails off. And they looked at us and they said, ice cream. And we said, great. So we sent out a crew to the local grocery store and got all kinds of ice cream. It was like you were a small child again. You could get the fudge bar, you could get the ice cream bar, you could get the push-up, the bomb pop, whatever it was that you wanted. And we brought this stuff in, and the cheer that went up from this crowd was deafening. And then everybody started to come get their ice cream, different kinds. And they went back to work at their tables. Well, we would have never guessed that ice cream was going to be that big a difference maker. But it was unbelievable. They all knew that they wanted ice cream. There was like this groundswell. And so we were able to do that reward. Now, was that in the comp system? I don't think so. But was it in the reward system? Well, they knew best what was going to feel rewarding at that time. And so asking people is a key piece of this puzzle. And we don't have to guess. It doesn't have to be difficult. People know best what they need. And if we ask them and then are willing to respond, I think it's a huge win, bigger than anything else we could do.
This is like the perfect illustration of transitioning from the golden rule to the platinum rule.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I've heard that one in the last week a few times where people are, do as I would have done unto myself. And I'm like, always the hair goes up in the back of my neck because I'm like, well, that's good for you, but is it really good for them?
Yeah. So treat other people the way they want to be treated.
Amen.
And the question that people often ask, but how would I know? Here's an idea. Ask them.
Exactly.
All right.
Exactly.
And you could have spent, not to get fiscal about it, but you could have spent lots of money on some other reward when what they wanted was ice cream.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's always, to me, it's so often surprising what it is that people actually want. Even when I help somebody, my first mentor said, help is usually helpful when it's asked for. And so you can ask people what they need for support, and you can be absolutely stunned because it's not what you would need. But boy, it sure helps that person. And it's like often so much easier than what you were going to do and get convoluted and try and figure. It's like, no, have a conversation. They're intelligent people. They know the answer, and give them space. Have them tell you, and then most importantly, act on it.
You do need to deliver. That's the other thing. If you're going to go through this, you need to walk the walk as well as talk the talk. Let's circle all the way back to the start of our conversation, Jake. One of your levers is find opportunities for people to make a meaningful difference. So to crescendo this all up and all of this change effort, how do we make sure that that meaningful difference is front and center in all of this?
Yeah, so I think one really important thing is to draw circles that include people in change work. That the larger the team that you have, the bigger difference they can make. And again, what's meaningful to me and what's meaningful to you can be two very different things. So again, having the conversation and asking somebody, what will make a difference for you? What will it be that you can do uniquely? We wrote this book, You Don't Have to Do It Alone. And one of the chapters was, how do you invite people? And the most powerful way to invite somebody into a process or into a change effort is to do it personally. Is to say, Mick, you know what? You ask really good questions. And because of those questions, we need that in our team to be able to make good decisions. And so we want you to join the team, and we want you to really make sure that you feel like you've got room and space to be able to ask those questions. Because if we don't get those, we're all missing out. Not only are you missing out on making a meaningful difference, but we're all missing out on you not making a meaningful difference. And to that, we all suffer. And so I think that people being asked what's meaningful to them, and then asking other people what they can contribute, what other people can contribute that they'll find meaningful. Because there's two sides to this equation. One of them is me on my own, and where do I believe I can make my best contribution, but also where do others think I can make my best contribution? Because often it's the things that are like, this is no problem. You want creativity and you're asking Jake Jacobs? Come on. You want ideas? This is simple, right? Why are we even bothering with the conversation? Because that's easy to me, but that doesn't mean it's not valuable to somebody else. I'm sure, Mick, you have heard a lot of times that your listening and your questions are a gift. And so for you, it may just be what you do during the podcast, but for the teams that you're on, it's pure gold. And so making sure that you listen to what other people value about you and what you value about yourself. There are a lot of these both and situations we've been talking about, and they come from two sides of the same equation. It's like, how do you get the best team? Everybody brings their best to the team, and there's wants and offers. So what is it that I want from you to be able to bring my best? And that's something that you can contribute as well.
I love everything you've just said, Jake. It's one of the things I really believe is that every person on the planet has got their individual superpower. And one of the things that people really struggle with is to recognize that they have that power that other people do not have, and they appreciate it. So you may be the very best at something and you don't realize it, and you may not realize that the value that it brings to the greater good and the greater collective team. So really, and sometimes it takes someone else to point it out for you as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Often. There was an entrepreneur's course, Mick, I took years ago, and they talked about your unique ability. So your unique ability is where these three things meet. One, you love to do it. So what you love to do, and you do it well, right? I mean, I can love to do a lot of things and be lousy at them. So that is not my unique ability. So I got to love it. I got to do it well, and other people have to value it highly. When you put those three together, that's a unique ability. That's something that is a superpower. Other people value it, and it's easy. So some of these superpowers are so easy that we just do them getting out of bed in the morning. We don't even think of them as anything special, and yet other people can stand in awe of us and go, how did they just do that? Well, asking people what your superpower is may be uncomfortable. So maybe you say, what are the things I do that really contribute to the team? And get a list of them, and actually don't be shy about it, but get that list and then look at them and say, well, which of these do I really love to do? Because I may be doing some things that, don't get me out of bed in the morning. Great. Still make those contributions. But the things that you love to do, find opportunities to do those more and more. And not only will your life be better because you'll be doing stuff that you love, but every team that you join will have the benefit of those superpowers. And, watch out for the teams that you're on, because those superpowers are they make a huge difference in the performance of a team.
One of the things I think people should maybe think about and give this a try is you need techniques to uncover those. Give people a platform to tell their story and to help them uncover themselves what their superpower is. But then collectively as a team, you're going to have these moments of people looking at each other and going, oh, I had no idea that Sarah was good at blah, blah, blah. And you're going to discover so much more about each other, and then find out if these superpowers that everyone has are complementary to each other, and almost guarantee that they will be if you can find the way to put the pieces of the jigsaw together.
Yeah, absolutely.
I've got to ask you the question now, Jake, right on the spot. What's your superpower?
My superpower, which is I totally love to do this. Other people have told me that they value it highly. And I will say, with all modesty, I do it super well, is this immediate impact based on creativity. So you can give me any situation. And Mick, you and I talked about this, I think, before we started, where in all my keynotes, I start this clock running with 5 minutes, and I have the levers available to me, and the person has a situation they're trying to improve, and that clock ticks down. And in 5 minutes, I can take those levers, that person's situation, and help them get to a better place. And so that immediate impact is a piece of it, and then creativity about how to get there is a second piece of the puzzle for me.
I can clearly see that, and I can't wait to see the video of you doing this rapid fire round thing that you do at the conferences. That sounds awesome. I'm going to return serve here now, and I'm going to say, what is my unique ability? I'm going to use the criteria that you use, Jake. I love golf. I'm lousy at golf.
Yeah.
I love tennis. I'm lousy at tennis. I enjoy it, but I'm lousy at tennis. I love listening to people, and I've loved listening to you today, Jake. I do think I'm good at listening to people, and I do think that people find that to be value adding. So this has been such an amazing conversation listening to you, Jake, and it's what drives me to do this podcast, is to find people like you and collect diverse voices and opinions and knowledge, and to try to share it with people so that they can look to improve their own leadership skills. So thank you so much for everything that you've shared today. I'd like to go into our own rapid fire round now of a few questions to draw us to a close. So you're an accomplished author, multiple books. What's your favorite book or book that's changed your life?
I liked Ralph Waldo Emerson on Walden Pond. And I like that one because I remember reading it, as a younger man. And he says when it's time for him to leave, he left for the same reason that he came. He was curious and he wanted to learn. And so he had spent his time on Walden Pond doing what he wanted to do, to learn, to expand his thinking and to have a respite from whatever the everyday noise was in his environment. And so he said, and I left for the same reason for which I came. And very simple, very clear. I loved that his answer was the same one on the way in as it was on the way out.
Great message there. What about your favorite quote?
This one comes from Thomas Jefferson. It was September 4th, 1812. And he said, if we think the people of the society not enlightened enough to exercise their discretion in a wholesome way, our job is to inform them, not take it away.
Oh, wow. I can think of so many events in the world right now where that applies. Oh, wow. Okay. Next one will be challenging, I think. Let's see. You've been in this game for 30 years without showing your age too much. Have you seen any generational change around your business of organisational change? Are we seeing any shift as we move from baby boomers to Gen X to Gen Y to Gen Z or Gen Z in the US? Are you seeing any generational change about attitudes towards change?
Yeah, I think there are, and I think that they're significant. I think one thing that's changed is people are much more interested in it. I mean, I think that if we go back generations, there was less change. And if we play it through to today, there's less desire for change. But if you get to Gen Z and millennials, change has been part of their everyday life, and substantial change. I mean, you just look at technological change, you look at the change in communications, you take a look at the change in information. I mean, I was growing up, the World Book Encyclopedia was on our shelves, right? And now it's like literally I find myself, anything that I want to know, I'm on my phone and I find it out. So I think that the amount of change and the welcoming of change is much higher. I also think that the demands that people have of work, what their expectation is of a good day, is way different, and it's much higher. So whereas I may have in past generations been satisfied with a paycheck and a pension, right? Now it's like, no, I need to be engaged. I need to be have my voice heard in the direction of this organization. I need to have influence. I need to be cared about as a human being. I mean, all of these things that before, I'm not saying we didn't have the needs, but they weren't expressed. And they weren't things that people would talk about being dissatisfied with. because it was all vanilla. Everybody had the same thing where you got a paycheck and a pension, and that, I'm good. I'll find my joy somewhere else. I'm not going to find it at work. The other thing I think is really different is that people themselves are changing so often that it's become part of the ethos. It's been part of society. And by that, I mean, there are these studies about how many jobs somebody's going to hold in a lifetime. And, one or two, one was what the answer used to be, right? And now you find, well, how many jobs are people having? You're going to have a dozen jobs in the course of your lifetime. And even if I look at my own, I've done the same thing, Mick, but I've done it in 7 different places. And, I'll say I'm 58. So, already I'm behind the 8 ball in terms of how many, will I get to a dozen or not? I don't know. But just the nature of what life is like today is changes embedded in it much more than it ever used to be. And so I think that our ability as organizations to change ought to increase commensurately. And so I think that flexible organizations and, people talking about their work hours and where they work and how they work and with whom they work, all of that is a lot more up for grabs. And I think for the better. I think that we're healthier organizations, we're more resilient organizations. We can meet more people's needs, however diverse those might be. All of that is for the better. And yes, I work in the world of change, so I may have a bit of a bias. But I think that, any organism on the planet that's more adaptive to its environment is going to be healthier. And so if we are those organisms and we're more adaptive to what change is, and our organizations get seen as living systems, all of that is for the better.
There's so many things that resonate with me there, Jake, and I'll do my best to play back some of it and add a little bit of flavour and see what you think. It was interesting what you said about whether some of it has been technologically enabled as well, some of that change. And I will pick millennials just as my example. So millennials do have different, I'll give an example, learning preferences compared to generations before them. So they love collaborative learning. They like to learn socially. They like micro-learning. They like gamification, things like this. And some of those things maybe were not technologically enabled for previous generations like you and I. The next part about job hopping or having multiple careers, multiple jobs, etc., part of that I think is mindset. And I think part of it is related to being less materialistic, because the dream is no longer necessarily the house and the car and all this kind of stuff.
2.5 children.
Yeah, I think that because that's changing, the burden of debt is not there as much. So previous generations really required long-term job security because they had mortgages to pay, they had certain materialistic lifestyles to maintain. Millennials are more about experiences. And if they're not enjoying the experience at company A, they'll leave and they'll look for company B. And the final one is, I think that millennials, although this has always been there, it's now amplified. That meaningful purpose, working for a company that has a very clear vision and purpose and a meaningful purpose, is far more important to them than previous generations, including all the way through to impacts on societal issues like.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And being able to work for an organization that you're proud of, what they stand for and how they do business and how they treat the planet and how they treat diverse people. All of that is, I think, a key determinant on where people are going to clock in and clock out.
100%. All right, final 2 questions, Jake. What's the one thing you know now that you wish you knew when you were 20?
Oh, Lord. Well, I don't know how much time we've got, Mick, but I think the thing that I wish that I had known is it's all going to be okay. That the number of things that I used to worry about, and I think of myself as a relatively easygoing person, but the number of things that I used to tie myself up in knots over in terms of my own life or my clients or my family and significant other, and all these things that used to be, it's like somebody was in a session I was in earlier in the week, and she was talking about all of these issues that she had taking over as a new supervisor. And I said, everybody was giving her advice, and I stood up and I said to her, nobody cares about this as much as you do. So you're not nearly as important in these people's lives as you think you are. And so I think that kind of attitude that goes, my first mentor used to say, what you are doing is the most important thing in the world. And at the same time, it doesn't matter at all. And I think that, remembering that doesn't matter at all, it's like I could get very, very engaged and passionate about what I believe. And I think that I sometimes would forget that, life's going to go on. It's going to be good. The world will be all right. And I can make my own contribution to it, but that's what I can do, my own contribution.
Mm-hmm. Great advice, and helps people keep things in perspective. I like that a lot. And the final question, I'm sure many of our audience have been enthralled as I am and learnt so much from this session. If people want to learn more, Jake, how do they get in contact with you?
Yeah, so I think the easiest way for people to reach out is via my website, which is jakejacobsconsulting.com. And the other thing on there, Mick, that I encourage them to download is an ebook that I developed called 27 Ways to Achieve Faster, Easier, Better Results Immediately. So I talked about this immediate impact being one of my superpowers. And what I did is there are 8 of these levers. We've talked about a number of them. But what I did for each lever is I stepped back and I said, what are the simplest things that somebody could do to gain the benefits of this lever immediately? And then had 3 or 4 ideas for each of these levers that people could go out and try. And I mean, like, set the ebook down and go do it. So one example of this is find somebody who's resisting the change that you're trying to create. Put the ebook down, go find this person and say, could you say more about why this is difficult for you? Like, tell me more about what's going on for you about this change. And then with that person, see how you can address that issue. Because sometimes it's just as simple as asking. And that's just one of 27 different things that you can do. But what I like about this is they all are about paradigm shifts. This is not about going and asking for more budget. This is about going and opening your mind to new possibilities. And then acting on those new possibilities, and consider it an experiment. If it's not your style to do some of these 27 ways, and it may not be, then just chalk it up to an experiment and see, well, how's this one going to work? And get into the I wonder space if this might be helpful. And you can even go up to somebody and say, look, I'm just trying this for the first time. I don't know how it's going to work. Let me ask you this question. And it gives you permission. That the person is not going to give you a hard time if you start with, I've never tried this before and I'd like to give it a shot. Would you mind if I did this work with you? People always want to help. So if you go up with that kind of an attitude, you're going to find people being helpful to you and supporting you in trying to do business in new ways, whatever that might be for you.
I really like that statement that you made about put the ebook down and go do it. Reading about change doesn't implement change. Implementing change implements change. Yeah, well done, Jake. And I will be putting in the show notes the links that you can get access to Jake and jakejacobsconsulting.com and some of the different things that we've discussed on today's show. Please do go ahead and download that ebook. It sounds very implementable and something that all of you will get some benefit from. There's also details on his website about the different programs and services that Jake's organisation provides, and also links to enable you to buy the book. Well, I should say books, because there's multiple books. But to talk briefly about leverage change, I've read it. It's a great book. It covers a lot of the territory that we've discussed in today's interview in more detail, and gives it in a way that are 8 very practical ways to achieve faster, easier, better results when you're looking to implement change. So thank you so much, Jake. It's been an absolute pleasure. I've learnt so much from you today, and I know that our audience will as well. Thank you for your time.
Yeah, my joy, Mick. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Leadership Project podcast at mickspears.com. I'm your host, Mick Spears. Sound design and editing by Faris Sadek. Social media by Gerald Calabo. And special thanks to our operations manager, Say Spears. We appreciate you, and we appreciate your time today. You can catch the video podcast and our series of shorter videos by subscribing to the Leadership Project YouTube channel. And you can join the conversation at our Facebook community group. We look forward to bringing you another great interview next week as we learn together and lead together. In the meantime, please do take care, look out for each other, and always remember to challenge the status quo.